the Rav said to him, he said, Maoz, you look like a sweet guy and everything, and you seem like a great guy, but you're very weak in Gemara. He basically didn't accept him. And Maoz looked at him and said, no, this is where I'm going.
One of the soldiers told his mother and said, she asked if he's scared. He said, well, I'm scared, but if I'm next to Binyamin, I won't be so scared.
When you lose a child and suddenly you're looking at his whole life from a different perspective, you slowly piece together a much more complete picture of the personality, even though it's your child and you kind of knew all this stuff. It's not a major chidushim, but things come into focus.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Shtark Tank. Shtark Tank is a podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. This week is Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. For this special episode, we will be speaking to two fathers who lost their sons in the early months of the war. First, a conversation with Eitan Morell about his son Maoz Morell HYD. Then, you will hear from Rob Airley about his son Binyamin Airley HYD. At the end, we will replay some great moments from Shtark Tank about the beauty and kedusha of living in Eretz Yisrael. One episode, which I still get great feedback about, is with Eli Freedman. We also had a very popular conversation with Yaakov Ehrenkranz about the finances of making Aliyah. And finally, you will hear a little bit more about my own Aliyah journey with a clip from the DHR Podcast hosted by Zach Lennick, where I was a guest. Before we jump in, a quick reminder that you can receive exclusive written content directly to your inbox by subscribing to our newsletter. Go to shtarktank.org or follow the link in the show notes to subscribe today. I don't usually do intro monologues, but I think it's important to mention a few quick things before we go to our guests. First is that there are many bereaved families who are enshrining the memory of their loved ones with lots of publicity. This is very special, allowing the legacy of these Kedoshim to regularly inspire all of Klal Yisrael. But it's important to mention that there are other families who have taken a different path. Some are coping okay with the loss, but it's too hard for them to speak publicly. Others are literally collapsing under the pain. I would like to take a moment to remember these families as well. The second thing is that sacrifice takes many forms. Many soldiers have returned physically, but inside they are broken and shattered. Itamar Alush fought on October 7th with his comrades from the Ofakim Police Department. He saved many lives by helping evacuate the wounded and eliminating a number of terrorists. Itamar also saw way too much on that terrible day. A number of people died in his arms, including people he knew and loved. Itamar was not killed on October 7th, but he was never the same. Just a few months ago, he celebrated the bar mitzvah of his son. A few days later, he suffered a fatal heart attack. On Yom HaZikaron, I encourage everyone to remember other types of sacrifice as well. It's been over 2 years and a little hard to remember, but we cannot forget that in the early months of the war, the daily battles were fierce and deadly. Every soldier who went in, every wife, mother, and child who said goodbye to their loved ones knew exactly what was at stake. It is our duty to remember the sacrifice of these heroes, salute their bravery, and express our infinite hakarat hatov. So we spoke about those who suffer in silence. We spoke about the various types of sacrifice, and I wanted to add a third and final point. When my parents decided to make Aliyah, I was 12 years old, and my great-grandmother, Amama, Zichronah Levracha, was still alive. When my parents told her that we were saying goodbye and moving across the ocean, her first and only question was, what will be with Yaakov and the army? And for many Americans, this is a fair and big question about Aliyah. It's a bit crazy to think about moving to a place where you are asked to put your life on the line. But reflecting on the events of the last 2.5 years has given me a fresh perspective on this issue. Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut are attached for a reason. Our love and appreciation for Israel is what makes this sacrifice possible. And we are inspired by those who have made the ultimate sacrifice to build Israel even more, fill it with more life, more joy, and more strength. Wishing everyone a meaningful Yom HaZikaron and a very happy Yom HaAtzmaut. We are joined now by Eitan Morell. Eitan, thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
So maybe just a little bit of a brief background about your own personal journey, making Aliyah, settling in a unique community that is a little bit off the beaten path before we get into the story of your son, Maoz.
So I grew up in a small community in upstate New York in Binghamton, and I went to high school in MTA, New York. And after high school, I came to Israel for the year, and I stayed a second year, and then I went to the Army, and then I went back to America for a few months, and I realized that was not what I wanted. And so I came back to Israel, and I went to college here. And when I got engaged to my wife, Varda, we knew that we wanted to live in a small community. And that's what I grew up with. That's what I wanted. I didn't want to live in a big city. But we didn't know exactly where. And our friends were moving to this little small place called Talmon. Our friends who were already married like a year already. And they convinced us to move there with them. So we came, we checked it out. We said, okay, we'll move here. We have these one people that we know. We were renting a caravan. So if we hated it, we could leave. We weren't, investing in a house or anything. And we were engaged at that point. And our wedding was in America. So we went to America to actually get married. And then when we came back here, we discovered that our friends didn't move to Talmon. They packed out and moved somewhere else. So we didn't know anybody here. That was back in 93. And we've been here now since then. We've met a few people since then. And, it was very small when we first came. It's, over the years, we've grown as a family, as the yeshiva grew. And, it worked out. So
Amazing.
that's how we arrived here. Both Varda and I stayed in Israel pretty much since we came for the year and stayed. I had a few months in America, but basically we both have been here since our year.
Okay, amazing. So we're here to talk about your experience and losing your son, Maoz Morell, Hashem Yikom Damo. And it's obviously impossible to capture your whole life in a brief podcast. Maybe I thought we would just sort of choose one question, a sort of unique angle, which is that he learned in an interesting yeshiva. I wonder if you can tell us about that yeshiva and why he was a good fit. What about him made that yeshiva right for him?
Okay, so first of all, I'll start with the fact that Maoz always had difficulty in school. He had ADHD, he had some learning disabilities. School was always very hard for him. Gemara was always very hard for him. He worked very hard throughout high school. He finished high school. He did Bagrut. He did everything that he was supposed to do, but it was a struggle for him academically, not socially, academically. And when he was finishing 12th grade, you have to decide, what am I going to do after this? And like with his older brothers, I feel that the decision about what they do after high school is in Israel, that's a decision that's 100% up to them. And it's like really almost one of the first times that you have to really decide, what do I want? Because, it's not even an issue of like getting in, like with college in America, people have to get in this place. And in Israel with the boys' high school, there's an issue of getting in here. Pretty much with the Hesder yeshivas, if you want to go there, then you can go there. It's not an issue, but there's so many different options, and there's different Hesder yeshivas that are different from each other, and there's yeshiva gvahot, and there's mechinot, and there's all kinds of millions of programs. So it's the first time a kid has to really decide, what do I want? And everything's open to me, and I have to do a beirur, what is right for me? And I try and, to be more of an advisory capacity. I thought I really want them to do that on their own. And he visited a few places, and he very, very quickly came to a decision that this is a place that he wants to go to. Now, it wasn't 100% clear to me why he was so clear that this is a place that he wants to go to. I have some ideas, but the place that he went to is yeshiva that at the time was in Tapuach, and now it's in a place called Evyatar. And this yeshiva is I guess almost like an outgrowth or a satellite yeshiva from Eitan Morell, which is a much more well-known and more vatik yeshiva. And at the time, this place was a few years old, like maybe 4 or 5 years old. And there is a very, I think, significant difference between Eitan Morell and Tapuach, even though they're connected. Rav Eliakim is the nasi of both of them. The Rosh Yeshiva and many of the Ramim themselves learned for many years in Eitan Morell. So they're very connected to Eitan Morell, but there's definitely a difference in style. I would say that Eitan Morell is more serious in terms of the actual lumdus and learning than this place is, but this place has a more like Fermi feel, more dusty, less serious, if you're familiar with that whole thing. And I think that he felt for him, he wanted a place that was a serious place. He didn't want one of these places that's not serious. And he felt this was like the right fit for him. He was serious about Yiddishkeit, serious about learning, but he didn't excel at it. And when he went for like I said, it's not hard to get in. If you want to go, generally, you can go. They want you more than often with these places. But still, of course, there's a bechina. And he went there to Kol Shavo Yeshiva, and he did a bechina faher, I guess you'd call it in America. And at the end of the faher, the Rav said to him, he said, Maoz, you look like a sweet guy and everything, and you seem like a great guy, but you're very weak in Gemara. And he was very weak in Gemara. He goes, in our yeshiva, we pretty much learn Gemara almost the whole day. I mean, we learn Gemara morning, afternoon, night. That's the main focus of everything. And I see that you're very weak. And I think that there's other yeshivas that you would do better in. And he basically didn't accept him. And Maoz looked at him and said, no, this is where I'm going. This is the right place for me. The Rav said to him, look, if you want to come, you can come. But once you get here, you'll see that it's not the right, that it'll be hard for you, and you'll come just on your own. If you want to come, you can come. So Maoz ended up going there. I think he wanted to go there because he wanted to be that type of guy. He wanted to be in a place where he has to work to be on the level of the people there. He wanted to be Zanav la'arayot, as they say, as opposed to Rosh Yeshiva. He wanted to be in a place. Now, this was a place that he thought that he could do that, and it wasn't too much. In other words, it was like a place that he could, and he liked the type of guys that were there, and he liked the Rebbeim, and it really was a good choice for him. It was a very good fit for him. But when he was there, he had to work very, very hard. And he did. He worked very, very hard to keep his head above water because he took it seriously. In other words, when you're in Hester, there's no, at least in this place, there's no tests. There's no anything. All you're learning is Lishma, it's for you. And if you don't learn anything, then you don't learn anything. Especially in this place, it's very like, if you're not going to learn, they're not going to say anything. Everything's available to you, but they don't sit on top of you. And he pushed himself to learn as much as he could. And we heard many, many stories about him, about that aspect of him, how Gemara was very, very hard for him, but he would not give up until he understood Gemara. He would sit, the Chavrusa would explain in the Gemara, and he'd say, I don't understand it, Levanti. And this would go on and on and on, 7, 8 times, till he said, okay, now I understand, then moved on. And then the next part, and then the next part, and the next part. And this is how he would go through every day. So he worked very hard to be successful in yeshiva, and he was successful in the sense that he was a male b'Torah. He worked very hard every day to do well. And this yeshiva, he had a very, very close kesher with his Rebbe and with the Rosh Yeshiva. And it was the right level for him and a place where he could do that. And that was, I guess he saw that, and I think that's why he picked.
Wow. So I had actually and hadn't really heard of the yeshiva before the Levaya, and hearing Afuz's Ramers Rosh Yeshiva speak was really quite special and emotional and moving to me, sitting there way in the back rows, standing. But I did want to ask, before we sort of move on to the next chapter in his life, to the army, that scene of him being told, don't come by the Rosh Yeshiva, and then his persistence to want to do it anyway. Was that something you had seen at different stages beforehand? Again, army is different. We're gonna talk about that in a moment. But before yeshiva, high school, middle school, younger, was he a very persistent type of guy?
So I'll tell you, one of the things that we discovered, that a lot of times we feel like we know our children very well, and we do, all of us. I mean, I don't mean the Morells in general. We have children, we know them. When you lose a child and suddenly you're looking at his whole life from a different perspective, and you're looking at his whole life with knowing the whole complete life, and you know where he ends up, and you know where he started, and especially in a situation like his, where you sit in a shiva and thousands of people come and everyone tells you stuff, you slowly piece together a much more complete picture of the personality, even though it's your child and you kind of knew all this stuff. It's not a major chidushim, but things come into focus. And one of the things that really came into focus, and I don't think we saw this in real time, but now we see many instances of this throughout his life, was that when he felt things were very important to him, he would not give up. Once he said, this is what is best for me, and he wouldn't give up. And we have a number of examples, and this yeshiva is one of the examples. And we have a few others, but in real time, we didn't see it that way. But now we see like that coming up again and again and again, and we sort of piece it together into actual personality trait that really comes out over and over again throughout his life.
That's very interesting.
He felt this is a place for me. He was sure of himself, and we have other examples of that too.
Wow, that's fascinating. Fast forward to his army service. If I recall at the Levaya, I think one of your other sons said the following. He said, it's a surprise that a Morell ended up in Sayeret Sanhanim. So maybe you could tell us about why it's a surprise, why we wouldn't expect the Morell and Sanhanim, and then
yeah. So
and then how he
my
ended up
son
there.
Dovi, my oldest, said that, and what he meant by that, and we all understood this, but you have to know our family very well to understand this. We have in our family 5 boys and then a girl. So for many, many years, and also now, we're really a family of boys. However, unlike the traditional family of boys, we are not a sports family. We are not athletic. None of my kids were into playing sports, really. You do a little because you have to, but they certainly weren't into following sports, and they certainly weren't barely into playing. Some of them were really not into it. And most of them, they sort of did enough to be socially acceptable, but it was not a passion. And even though I have 5 boys, we didn't have like basketball going on all the time, football going on all the time, soccer going on all the time. It was not, no one here is athletic. No one here is physical in that way, except for Maoz. Maoz he wasn't crazy into sports, but he was the only one that was actually good at sports. The guy that gets picked, the guy that's good. And he, played football, American football in the league. He was a captain of his team. He's led his team 3 years in a row to a championship. And he evolved in martial arts and kung fu for 6 years, and he really excelled. And he did very well in that up to a certain point that he went to high school in a dorm, and then it kind of fell off. But none of the others were like that. And also the kind of chevra that he was in specifically. So like no one of us were surprised that he was in like in a sayeret, but even Maoz did not even try to get into the top tier sayerot, what they call Yom Sayerot, to the gibush for that, even though I'm not sure, but there's a very solid chance if he would have attempted to do that, he would have gotten into a more top tier sayeret. And he didn't, because he wanted to be in Hefter. In other words, he didn't go like many of his friends to the gibush because he wanted to be in Hefter. And the only reason he was in Sanhanim, even, because in his second year in yeshiva, he realized that he's not completely focused like he would like to be in the learning. And he wanted to give 100% to everything. And he was not able to in the learning. So he said, okay, this is time to go to the army. If I can't focus fully on my learning, now I'm going to go to the army. But he wanted to stay in Hesder. So, yeah, as you know, I don't know who your listeners are, but in Hesder, some yeshivas go to the army in March and some go in August, and his yeshiva goes in August. But Maoz wanted to go in March because he wanted to go earlier because he wanted to already start the army, but he wanted to stay in Hesder. What's the problem? The problem is if you go and stay in Hesder, not together with your yeshiva, then you're running a risk, which was like the worst thing that could possibly happen, as far as Maoz was concerned, that you would be in like Shiryon or Totchanim or something like that, and not Chir, not infantry, which is what he wanted. But what's the solution to that? You go to Sanhanim. Sanhanim is a way to get into infantry. So once he went to Sanhanim, he went and did the gibush for the sayeret. He is very good at that stuff. He didn't think he would get in, but he got in. So once you get into the sayeret, you can't be in sayeret if you remain in Hesder. So at that point, he said, okay, I'm going to go with the sayeret. But up until he got into the sayeret, his plan was to remain in Hesder, be in Sanhanim, and then go back to yeshiva. He didn't even do gibush for other things. But we're not surprised that he got into sayeret in our family. We're not surprised he was in a sayeret. I think he could have been in even a more higher level sayeret if he wanted to. But he chose not to. But he was the only one in our family that's, I would say, truly athletic.
Interesting. So so I understand, and then the listeners, I think I understood this, but you're saying that in general, commando units have their own sort of acceptance process, which means that you're leaving Hesder, whereas Sanhanim, you can go in through Hesder, and then when you're in the Sanhanim Hesder, you can get accepted to the Sanhanim commando and then stay within the Hesder framework?
No. If you get accepted to Sayeret, then you can't remain with it, because a regular Sanchan, his training is 7 months. And then he's fully trained to go into combat. For Sayeret, the training period is 14 months. And with Hesder, the entire period that you're in the army, I think, is 17 months. So they're not going to let people train for 14 months, only to have 3 more months to be in the army. So if you get into the Sayeret, if you want to go to Sayeret, you have to leave Hesder. And they do that on purpose, because also they don't want people who got into the Sayeret to not go. In other words, if you got in, they want you.
Okay, so Maoz was killed in a very tragic incident that had many, many casualties. So can you tell us like the brief version of the events that occurred that day?
Okay. So on that day, it was February 15th, 24, Vav Adar. He had been at that point in Gaza for 95 days, with 72 hours that he was not in Gaza out of the last 95 days. And at that point, they had been almost straight now for almost 8 weeks in Gaza. That means no showers, everything that in it. And the way it works in Gaza, for people who do not know, is that the soldiers would capture, capture a certain area, and then at night they would go into one of the buildings, a house or another type of building, usually a house, apartment that is in the area that they captured, and that's where they would sleep that night. And every night they'd move on and sleep in a different house, or every 2 nights, or every 3 nights, they'd switch houses. And that house was their base while they were there. And so that morning was 9 o'clock in the morning, and a group of soldiers were sitting in the living room of the house, which is in the front of the house, preparing to go out for like a mission that they had to do. And they were in their final preparations to leave the house, and a grenade came in through the window and blew up in the living room. And all of the 12 soldiers that were sitting there were all injured in various levels. Maoz was not in that room. Maoz was in a more internal room because he wasn't going on this mission. And so he was in another room asleep. And he woke up from the grenade. And he runs into the room and he sees all these injured people, and he sees his commander like thrown on the side, heavily injured. So first he dragged his commander further in to protect him, and then he put Jose,
Tourniquet.
how do you say, a tourniquet, but he had a third very serious wound over here, which you can't put a tourniquet on. And so he did a procedure called packing, which basically enabled him to stop the bleeding here, which saved his officer's life. Now, the thing about packing is that usually a regular soldier like Maoz was, who's not a medic, doesn't know how to do packing. This is something that medics usually do. Maoz knew how to do it because his officer, the one who was injured now, made sure, this is a Sayeret, and he said, we're the best. We have to know everything. He wanted everyone to be on a very high level of everything, but also high level of medical knowledge. So they really drilled that into them and learned stuff before they went into Gaza. And so that's how Maoz even knew how to do this. And it saved his life. After that, he went and started helping with all the other wounded. They had a medic and even a paramedic who was with them, and they kind of dealt with the more serious ones. And Maoz was helping. And each soldier that they helped him and bandaged him, they had to then evacuate them. And so each soldier, they were on the second floor. They had to go downstairs. Each soldier, they would take him up in a stretcher, go down the stairs and outside. And in Gaza, they have these armored personnel characters that they make them into ambulances. And so inside, they have a lot of medical equipment, and also doctors are there. And those kind of pull up, and they load them into there. And then from there, bring them to the helicopter, which then helicopters them into hospitals in Israel. So 12 times Maoz and his fellow soldiers went up and down, up and down, up and down to evacuate everyone. The whole time this is going on, there was a battle going on defending the house, because it wasn't, the grenade that was thrown was the opening shot of a planned attack on the house that they were in. They were in that house for more than one night. So the Hamas knew, they saw them, they knew they were in that house, so they planned an attack. And there was a team of Hamasnikim that were attending. As far as the terrorists were concerned, this was a very sophisticated attack on this house. So the other soldiers who were not wounded were defending this house, and also other soldiers that came from nearby houses. And so there's a whole gun battle going on the street. What I'm trying to say is that the whole taking all the soldiers and evacuating them, all that is going on under fire. So 12 times when they say go up and go down, that's all happening under fire. So he does all of that. And when they finish with that, the battle's still raging after they evacuated all the wounded. So he runs upstairs to his weapon, which is a mag. Every soldier has a weapon that is their specific weapon. A mag is a very big, machine gun, very, very heavy and big. Maoz was in charge of that. That was Maoz's weapon that he was trained on. So he runs upstairs to the mag. And now his officer has been wounded, so they already know what to do. They're all very experienced already. So it's not their first battle. So he runs upstairs to the mag, and he goes up to the roof in order to be able to give from the roof cover fire to the soldiers fighting below. When he gets up to the roof, he sees 2 soldiers up there. One of them is the the head commander of the whole Sanhanim, and who was already up there commanding all the troops coming in, all the forces, and another soldier who's always with the commander, his communications guy. That guy's name is Yair. And Yair told me this is what happened. He says, all of a sudden, in the middle of the battle, why in the middle of the battle? Because the grenade was thrown at 9 o'clock in the morning, and Maoz arrives to the roof at about 10 to 10, after it took that long to evacuate everyone. So as far as he's concerned, they're already in the battle for 45 minutes or so. And so in the middle of the battle, Maoz appears, and he says to him, Yair is shooting with his personal weapon. He says, Yair, step aside with that, toy gun that you have. Let me get in there with some actual firepower with my mag. And so, Yair steps aside, and he comes in with the mag, and he starts raining down. A mag, a very powerful weapon for infantry, and it creates a situation where the terrorists have to retreat into a house. So Maoz is standing on the roof of a house, and the terrorists are in a house across from him, and he is shooting constantly, and he traps them in the house because they can't leave because he's shooting at the house. During the time that he traps them in the house, the head commander they're able to bring a tank, and the tank shoots down the house from close range on top of the terrace. However, the area is very crowded. The houses are very close together. Like imagine like in the old city, the houses are a few meters away from each other. So when you take down a house with a tank at close range, pieces of the house fly all over, and a piece at that point flew directly at Maoz, and he was wearing a helmet, but right into his eye and into his head. And he fell there with the mag, but he didn't die yet. And 38 minutes later, he was in the hospital.
Wow.
That battle, by the way, didn't stop when Maoz was wounded. That battle only ended completely at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a 17, 18-hour battle.
Wow. So it's
There
really
was
incredible
another
how you.
soldier from his unit, Rotem Sar Hadar, who was killed by the grenade, not instantly, but he was also killed. And there were many wounded, like 3 or 4 wounded, I would say, more seriously, and others more lightly. His commander was injured very seriously, and he took a long time to recover, but now he's like fully recovered. He recently ran a 10K in 38 minutes, so he's doing okay.
So I guess, it's obviously incredible to hear about this battle and the heroism of Maoz and his comrades. And, so you mentioned that he was brought to the hospital alive. So tell us briefly about sort of the next step, and as far as like the efforts to save him and then what ended up happening.
So Varda and I were in our house in Talmon. We could have not been home, but we were both home, miraculously.
This was like a Thursday it happened, if I recall correctly?
Thursday, yeah. We got a phone call at 12:30. Varda got the phone call, and they said they were calling from the army. Your son Maoz has been injured very seriously. And they say in Hebrew, Patsua Kashe, and we'll be at your house in 10 minutes to take you to him. So they show up, and we don't know anything more than Patsua Kashe. And we get in the car, and we have an hour and a half drive from our house to the hospital in Beersheba.
Which hospital?
Soroka Hospital. So, and we don't know anything. Now, when they tell you Patsua Kashe, injured seriously, there's a huge range that could be within those words, Patsua Kashe. And we had no idea where he was injured, what we're talking about here. Is he going to lose a limb? We had no idea. So we get to the hospital after an hour and a half, and they meet us outside and say, we want you to see him. So they already take us in. At that point, he's already in the intensive care unit. And we see him, but, intensive care, he's not conscious. He's bandaged up. He's hooked up to all the intensive care, hardware.
He's wearing uniform?
No. He's not wearing uniform at this point. He's been in the hospital for a few hours already. And he's unconscious, and he's hooked up to everything. And so we look at him, and we have no idea still what the situation is, because, sometimes they keep you under on purpose, and we have no idea. And then the doctor takes us into his office, and he says, I'm very sorry to tell you that he suffered massive, irreparable damage to his brain, and it's inoperable. And that's it. There's nothing we can do. So I say to him, what do you mean? Like, there's no, any medical procedure, there's no, anything. There's nothing to do medically. So I say to him, so what are we talking about here? We're talking about hours, days? He says, yeah, hours, maybe a few days, maybe a couple days. And that's it. Like, there's nothing, he was very clear on that. So like when there's nothing more to discuss, like he was very clear of the situation. He said, there's no medical procedure to be done. We're just basically waiting. Basically he said, there's no hope. That's what we understood. That was what he was very clear. So Varda and I walk out of the room, obviously very broken. And we meet an Army officer. And she introduces herself and she says she's a ksinat nifgei. Her job is to liaise between the families and the army. And she says to me, look, it doesn't look that way maybe to you right now, but you've actually been given a gift. Because a lot of times, most situations, a soldier falls in battle and they notify the parents that their son has been killed. And then there's a funeral and that's it. But you, even though he's not conscious, and even though he might not have very much time left, he is still alive right now. And therefore, you can take this opportunity to part with him, to have that closure. We say in Hebrew, lihi pared. That was like a very, very important thing that she told us that we really took to heart. And we took that very seriously. And so we had all of our other 5 children come to the hospital. And we started Thursday, started a process of kind of parting with Maoz, and not just our immediate family. His friends, whoever could, started coming, and our friends, and his rabbis, and his teacher, everyone who was in his life, who was important to him, started streaming like to the hospital. And everyone who came, because outside not everyone understood fully, I explained to them very clearly that there's no hope and they should take this opportunity to say goodbye to him. And that was a very, very important thing for us. And I think it changed a lot about the whole experience. We came to Levaya different than people that come to Levaya without that. When we were in the hospital, we had a lot of rabbanim people, and people say to you, don't, Lolit Yesh, don't, even Chadar, Lolit Yesh, we're davening with that. And I would say to them, look, if there's going to be a miracle, I'll take it, but I can't go about the next few days assuming, and I can't go about my business managing my day under the assumption that there'll be a miracle, because all the doctors say, and we even had, we didn't feel we needed, but another one of the soldiers that was injured also very seriously, he was also in the hospital, and his mother told us that they have a neighbor who is the head of the neurosurgery in Beilinson, and the head guy in Soroka was like his student. And he's like a top guy and a close personal friend. She said, you should talk to him, second opinion, whatever. We didn't feel a need to second opinion because it was so clear to the doctor, and it wasn't like there were no medical decisions to be made. But, she says he's a close personal friend of ours and he's going to call you. And this big doctor from Beilinson called us, and he was very helpful. And he told us, he says, look, if the doctor told you, Anush, that there's no way out of this, that's, he says, when I tell someone that's how it is. He says, however, once every few years, this is what he says to me, I have a case where I'll tell someone that, and then there's like something that I can't explain, and they come out of it. Because I don't want to give you hope, but like that has happened, because once every 3 or 4 years, I get a situation like that. He's a very experienced, doctor. Now, because Beilinson and Soroka are both in Klalit, he can just from his computer go in and see all of the CTs and everything. He can see everything our doctor sees. And also he knows the doctor, so it was no problem. So then he looks at all of the medical, everything. And then he calls us back and he says, look, what I said before, that could be, but not in a situation like this. After what I saw, he was 100% like, there's really no.
So just so I understand what he was talking about there, again, Maoz was rushed to the hospital. They did a number of scans. They also opened him up, or just scans, and he just saw damage, which was so completely, his brain was so.
They brought him into they brought him into the surgery operating room, ready to do surgery on his brain. But when in the room, they were looking at the CTs, and they realized in the surgical room there is nothing we can do. We can't, it's not, if we touch it, it's massive damage. If he stays alive anyway, he'll be like with massive brain, and they couldn't move it. It was a huge piece that was lodged into his brain. So like once he was in the surgical room, they saw that there's nothing to do, and they basically just like bandaged him up and moved him in. And that was clear to any doctor who understands anything about this, that was a situation. And it was just a matter of time. So we really like used that time. And then, so that was Thursday and Friday. Tons of people were coming, and then we had a very long Shabbos. You're there for Shabbos, and there's no phones on Shabbos. We're from no phones. There's no distractions. That was a very hard Shabbos, of course. Motzei Shabbos, tons of people came, and Motzei Shabbos, he's still alive. The doctor said I didn't think that he'd still be with us on Motzei Shabbos, and then we started getting like a little worried that this could turn into a much longer. There are people who stay alive for years in this situation. So, I was like a little nervous about that. And then the kids were worried. We decided this was on for Motzei Shabbos Sunday. And then on Monday, his unit, after being in 8 weeks straight in Gaza, in other words, he was injured on Thursday, but they only got out of Gaza on Monday as scheduled. In other words, before this whole episode, we knew that he was coming home for a visit on Monday. And they kept on fighting, and through Shabbos, they were there and everything. And on Monday, they got out, and they didn't go home. They came to the hospital to visit the wounded and also Maoz. And so they had a very, emotional party, because I explained the situation to them too. And these guys, Maoz was with them for 2 years. From his first day in the army until that moment, they were together. And in that time, 14 months of very intensive training, almost 100 days together in Gaza, which is very intensive. And they were really like brothers. And that was a very emotional parting. And that was they left at maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday. And we decided to do something we hadn't done, a special family tefillah. So we had all of our children gather together at 7 o'clock at night in the room with Maoz. And we davened, we sang a little bit. And about 5 minutes into this, we're all sitting just us around his bed, and the numbers on the monitor start to plummet in front of our eyes. And we realize something big is happening. So we just stop, and the whole family together, we all close our eyes, and we're like, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And we open up our eyes after Echad, and all the numbers were on 0. And the nurses come rushing in, and that was it. That was how he left this world, with all of us around him saying Shema. We feel that for us, that was it was a zchut. The whole situation, as hard as it is, we see it as a zchut for our family. And to be able to be with him in that way at the last moments was not something that everyone is zochet to. I mean, obviously, we would be more zochet. We weren't in that situation, but the whole situation of him dying in battle and saving his last hour of life, he was saving lives. He was doing what he had to do. He was fighting for all of us. That's, for us, and the chama that we have, that zchut of that last hours. And not just then, in other words, he had a lot of that for the 100 days before that.
It's really emotional to hear again, as we approach Yom HaZikaron and remember these incredible stories, which are really just beyond words. Also, you mentioned the friends coming out of Gaza and coming for an emotional goodbye is something that, number of Levayas that I had been to, seeing these very, very strong, tough soldiers who have been through so much show up at Levayas and have to deal with that, seeing them break down is obviously,
by the way, those friends, many of them were not at the Levaya because they had to go already back to Gaza.
Wow. And so just finally, you are a tour guide. It was mentioned at the Levaya that you have been for decades showing people the beauty of Eretz Yisrael, including tours to Har Herzl. So, in the years, 2 years already, 2+ years since, how has this, or has this affected your sort of love relationship to Eretz Yisrael, given a greater appreciation, a more challenging dynamic since this has all happened?
It's a good question. I think that for me, it has strengthened more my kasher, because it's really sealed in blood at this point, even more than ever before. I was always felt a very strong kasher with Eretz Yisrael my whole life, and I think that something like this only made it even stronger. In terms of that, yeah.
Okay, Eitan Morell, thank you for sharing these, precious stories, precious memories of Moses' life and his death. Wishing you and the family continued nechama and chizuk, and for all of Klal Yisrael, we should have a Yeshuot B'karov.
Thank you.
We are joined now by Rob Airley. Rob, welcome to Shtark Tank. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me onto your podcast. I really appreciate it.
So before we get into a bit about your son, Binyamin, Hashem Yikom Damo, maybe a little brief personal background about yourself, your upbringing in the UK, and your Aliyah journey.
Sure. So I'm from Manchester originally. So I lived there first 22 years of my life. Went to university there. Actually went to yeshiva after university. I went to actually HTOR for a little bit, and then to Dr. Noam Chappelle's. I was at Chappelle's for like 2.5 years, and that's where I met my wife. Her uncle lived across the street from the yeshiva, and someone introduced me. So we ended up dating, getting engaged, and we had a choice of living in New York or Manchester. So New York won out. It was a close one. So we lived in Brooklyn for a few years, and then we lived in Cedarhurst. And we made Aliyah in 2006. So we've been here. We've been in Ramat Beit Shemesh the whole time since we've been here. We not lived in Eric or Ramat Shiloh. And we're very happy here. 3 of our kids were born in the US, and 3 kids here, and we have two grandchildren born recently here also. So that's the Aliyah in a nutshell.
Right. And so, yeah, obviously it's hard to encapsulate a whole life in a brief podcast episode. So I thought I'd sort of focus on one sort of unique thing about your son Binyamin, which was that he was very connected to a place called the Chava Shel Tzvi. Maybe you could tell our listeners about this Chava, what's it like, and why was Binyamin so connected to that place?
Right. So just a little, I guess, the background of Binyamin. He definitely struggled in mainstream schools. He went to like a bunch of different high schools, and then he found a wonderful school in Eilat, which he went to, and that really precipitated a real change in him. And a few of the guys from this yeshiva, Shabbos says they would go to this farm, which is, I don't know if your listeners think of a farm as, rolling hills and wheat and vineyards. This is just a patch of land. It's a mile or 2 outside of the Jewish community called the Beit Suf.
Just for our listeners, that's like Gush Etzion, right? Or
No,
where is that?
It's past Modi'in. It's like 20 minutes past Modi'in.
Okay,
Really,
my bad.
Bundaks. Yeah, no, it's a small town, Chalmish, the Beit Suf, which most people would not be so familiar with. And he started going to this farm, and he really fell in love with the lifestyle. Their goal and their rationale, these farms, is they'll be like I said, a mile or 2 away from the settlement, and they basically protect the area. So a lot of the times they'll have sheep or cows, and it would graze them in the area, and it would prevent the Arabs from coming close to the settlement. So just as the settlements are here to protect us in Beit Shemesh and Yerushalayim, Tel Aviv, so these farms are here to, in many ways, to protect the settlements. But it was extremely dangerous place. I realized that at the time, but I think hearing many of the stories afterwards, I didn't realize how dangerous it is over there, because you're literally surrounded by Arab villages. And before he was in the army, he would go out, without a gun. He would go just himself or just one person grazing cows, and there were lots of hostile villages around that. And then once he was in the army, oftentimes he would come back straight from the army, and instead of coming home, he would just come home briefly. He would go straight to the farm, spend Shabbos there, and do shvira, do guard duty on the farm on his day off. Most of his friends, and he was in the paratroopers, Sanhanim. So they would go home and sleep in their comfortable bed and eat their parents' food. And oftentimes he would go to the farm, and Shabbos morning would involve walking the cows for a few hours, and at night would be doing guard duty. So his friends in his unit, they were said, the army was like summer camp for him compared to what he was doing on the farm. There's even a video that I guess went viral after he was killed at the Shiva, where you could hear about 150 Arabs coming down a hill, a mountainside, coming towards him. It's just him and one other guy, and they didn't run, they didn't try and flee. We're not leaving these cows there, and you hear him on the phone with the army, and they're coming down this hill screaming Allah Akbar, and it doesn't faze him. He he said, 6 months before the war, he said, he's prepared to die for Israel. Again, not necessarily something that a parent wants to hear, but this is just who he was. There was just no changing him. He had no fear.
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, and you correct me if this is wrong or if I'm reading too much into this, like you seem to in high school have had a very hard time with, I don't know, maybe the more normal frameworks, the boundaries, the rules, the expectations of a more classic place, and you find this village which is literally beyond borders, beyond fences, very independent, very risky. So was that like one of the reasons why he was so connected and thrived so much there?
Yeah, I think you probably nailed it on the head. The sense of freedom, of being able to have, no boundaries, as it were, um, and um, and I think also he really believed in the ethos of the farms. Like he really came to believe it. A lot of these, he was unusual in the sense that unfortunately, a lot of these kids come. Sometimes they really come from struggling backgrounds. So a lot of these kids go on the farms. But he was, thank God, able to maintain an amazing connection with the family and with school and with the army unit and with the farm. He has, like, I guess, a few different aspects of his life that often intersected, sometimes didn't, and it was very comfortable wherever he was. But yeah, growing up, a typical school framework um, was not for him. Definitely bounced around. He probably, with ADHD when he was, um, and wanted to take medication for that. So we had to, so we had lots of calls from principals and teachers. But he found himself in the school in Eilat. Sphere in Eilat was just incredible because again they gave him the freedom in the school.
So I mean, it's interesting the way things develop because you take all of that experience, challenging experience, with frameworks that are very demanding and very strict, and you go to the army, which is maybe the epitome, and Sanhanim, which is even more of a very very demanding and a lot of discipline and very little personal freedom of expression and what you do and where you do and what you dress. So how was he able to make that transition from the utter freedom of the farm to the discipline of Sanhanim?
So yeah, that's really a good point because yeah, he had this sense of freedom, no boundaries, and in the army, like you say, it's all rules. But he thrived in that situation. I mean, he thrived everywhere he was, and he ended up being the Mitzdayan, the best soldier in his pluga, in his platoon. He got that award. So you only get that if you follow the rules. He was a great soldier. The soldiers looked up to him. We went to a barbecue right before he went into Gaza, and one of the soldiers told his mother and said, she asked if he's scared. And he said, "Well, I'm scared, but if I'm next to Binyamin, I won't be so scared." And so he was able to impart that. He was the one that was able to rouse everybody and give chizuk to the fellow soldiers. And yeah, but it's a good point. At some point he knew that this army was rules and he had to follow them. Even some rules that he didn't like, but in the army, he just got to stick with it. And he was able to thrive. And I think that shows very much about him. He's able to thrive in all different kind of situations and areas.
It's interesting. One of the things that I've heard about these elite units, and I've never gotten anywhere close to there with my very lackluster, physical capabilities. But one of the things I've heard that there is somewhat of a place. Obviously the baseline and the general framework is very, very regimented, but there is a place for being smart and cunning and having that ability to maybe talk back in the right way and at the right time and express yourself. And as we're talking, I'm remembering, my brother-in-law Ali Moshe Hashem Yikom Damo, knew how to stand up for himself, and when something that he felt was not right coming from above, he would find a way, again, carefully, gently, in the right way. So was he able to somehow take all of that fierce independence and find a way to channel it in the army?
So he did actually have really good relationships with the higher ups. One of the soldiers said that they would they wouldn't even look in their eyes of the people who were very high up in the paratroopers, and he would speak to them on almost like on a first name basis. And they said one time there was a hike and all the Tiol and all the top soldiers were at the front march, all at the front, and they called in. They wanted Airley to come to the front so he could walk with them. So they were. He was able to build a rapport with them. If one time they all got in trouble and they got a lot of leave was cancelled, and he was the one that went to to the higher ups to plead their case. He had no fear. Again, one of his uh, commanders, he visited him on the farm. I think he was the only person he was able to visit on the farm was him, again, because he had this connection with him. And yeah, he was able to be with the regular soldiers and very much with the higher ups.
And so, he was fighting, as you mentioned, in Gaza. Tell us a little about what that was like for him and for you before, obviously he was tragically killed, but like approximately how long was it? What were they involved in? What was it like for you as a father, being in that situation of a son at the front lines?
So, right. So obviously October 7th happened, and we got a call that night saying they were going into a helicopter to fly into um, a place on the border, a small settlement on the border. Actually wasn't really hit that badly by one of the only places near Am. I think one of the security people there basically saved the so he was going into that to root out other terrorists. He went straight to the base. It was on the farm for a similar story, so he went straight to the base. And that night they went into Niram, and he spent I don't know, a week, 10 days, being there, flushing out any remaining terrorists, and then he went back to his base to do training, ready for when they were going to go into Gaza. We saw him. We went to a barbecue first of all, like all the parents were there, and everyone had to bring food. Everyone brought food except somebody forgot to. Nobody. It was told to bring the barbecue, so and then ended up not being a barbecue. But lots of. So we ended up barbecuing it the next day. My wife took it to the base, and then the Friday before he went into Gaza, which was probably like I think 4 weeks into the war training, we didn't hear from him that much. We had like a picnic Friday, Shabbat, and it was really the last time that we saw him. It was, hundreds of parents and soldiers, and he went in the couple of days later. We were told that really in the beginning he was him and a few of his unit were there to guard not his commander, but like one of the heads of the paratroopers. So we thought, okay, this is a cushy job. You're out of the firing line here because, obviously the higher ups, they don't want them to be in a dangerous situation. So he's protecting them. So we thought, okay, this is as good as he could get in Gaza. But he was a negavist. He was a machine gunner. That was his job in the army. And then right before Gaza, we used to give him to the toughest, strongest soldiers. He was given to somebody else. And we didn't know about what was coming up. And this other person took over his role as the machine gunner while he was protecting the commander. He broke his finger, and so they needed to find another machine gunner. So Binyamin was really happy to take that back. He was not happy just sitting around guarding commanders. He wanted to go in. He wanted to action. So he took the Negev back. And then that Shabbos morning, there was 2 or 3 Arab terrorists who were in a house that were shooting at soldiers, and they injured one quite badly. He was shot like 9 or 10 times. Baruch Hashem, he's made a full recovery again. He's had 2 kids since then. So there was another group of paratroopers, not his group, that was going into this house to root out remaining terrorists. There was a Druze commander called Jamal Abbas, and his right-hand man was Eli Freedman. And then my Binyamin, again, asked permission from his commander, can I go in with them? And he ran in with them. He didn't need to. He said, you need me. I have the Negev gun. I have the machine gun. And so even though it wasn't his job, nobody else from his unit went in. He just volunteered to go in. Unfortunately, there was an Arab terrorist who was hiding behind a couch, and he shot and killed all 3 of them.
Wow. So, obviously these deaths are so tragic. And at the Levi, I remember one of the things that stuck with me is, you spoke about, if I recall, correcting me my memory here, but you said you used to hate hugs, but you started to fall in love with them already in that first terrible day. So am I recall correctly? Can you explain more about what you meant by that?
Okay, English people are not the most cuddly type of people. We don't, they haven't seen a friend for a few years and just, shake their hand and pat them on the back. There's no big hugs like the Americans do. So I'm not really much of a hugger, but, obviously people coming up to me that day, and it felt good. People were hugging me. I was, but I must admit, since then I've got back to being a non-hugger. I've kind of known my wife's family that I'm not the biggest hugger. Although I did actually go to, unfortunately, a few weeks ago, a funeral of Moshe Katz, who was a Chabad soldier who was killed, and he was also in. It was the paratroopers and stuff, but he was in the paratroopers. And I went out with his father afterwards and explained that my son was killed 2.5 years ago. His father's a big guy, and he gave me this hug, and I was almost like melted in his arms. It was like, wow, if I can get one of these every day, this would be great, because it really, So, but on the day itself, it obviously I needed all the help I could get. It's not something that I really even thought of, and obviously it was a horrendous day, and the shiver, and carrying up, bearing the burden of our kids fighting and dying for Israel.
I wonder if you could maybe talk about that arc, which you just sort of described, the initial shock, and then now things are different, to what extent the tragedy has completely changed you in ways that you're never going back, to what extent you want to go back to somewhat of a routine, and you're, still have a life to live and things to do here. So like, to what extent those two things are, I'm sure they're both true, but like how you see the events that happened with your son completely changing you, and in what ways you've sort of, I don't know, stabilized or gone back to certain things to, your life is still going, and life does move on in a certain sense. So I'm wondering if you could talk to that.
Right. So, when obviously it hits you, I didn't realize until afterwards, like looking back, how obviously much affected me. After a few months, I remember thinking to myself, oh, I'm doing pretty well, pretty good here. But then, 4 or 5 months later, I'm thinking, wow, I really wasn't doing so great the first few months. I wouldn't say necessarily I had like bad days, but there's obviously many times, during the day when I think of my son, or it's a picture, video, becomes in the conversation, it is very jarring and difficult, especially when I think what it could have been. Simchas obviously are difficult, and Chagim, knowing that my son is not at our Seder table and is not at the birth of his nephew, and that's never going to change. Obviously, they talk about having, you could be simcha and be happy, and obviously in pain all at the same time. You're able to feel two different emotions. But I think, gradually, I think we're in a good place. Me and my wife really try. You come to our home, you wouldn't think we are necessarily parents of a fallen soldier. We have a lot of laughing and singing, dancing in the house, and happy occasions. But at the same time, it's obviously always there in the background. But my daughter said, actually, like a few weeks in, she said, we're broken, obviously, but we're not completely broken, completely devastated, like perhaps maybe a few other families, perhaps, because they were looking to us, me and my wife, as an example, and we didn't, fall apart. We were able to still try and get the most out of life, and they saw that, and they think that's made them happier, and people as well. Again, but I can't judge them. People go through all different kinds of situations. Right at the beginning, I went to visit Professor Alman, who's a famous Nobel Prize winner who also lost a son in 1982 in Lebanon. I just read a few things about him. I just felt like he had like a very optimistic life, a view on life. A lot of people come to the Shiva, and he also obviously lost kids. And, I understandably, it might be been a little difficult to be around them, but I wanted to go see someone who had an optimistic viewpoint. And I definitely found that with him, and that's been our mantra since. Try and put a positive spin on things. And with my wife now, especially, is she speaks a lot. She's going to America this Shabbos. She's going to the States to speak, and then the following 2 Shabbos also in America, actually, as well, coming back for Yom HaZikaron, Yom Morell. And I think people are looking to her as a sign of emunah and faith and bitachon. And we also have this project as well that we've been busy with as well, and that's been very helpful as well, Beit Binyamin, which we've been running last few years.
So, we'll get back to Binyamin in a moment. You mentioned Professor Alman, listeners who want to go back into the archives. We did actually have an episode with a Nobel laureate, Professor Alman, and he did speak about that experience of losing his son, the famous story with Rav Guzman. So we'll link to that in the show notes, and everyone can go and check that out. But you did allude to the challenge of family simcha and the mix of emotions that can lead to. So it's actually interesting because you made a wedding for Binyamin's brother Yehuda. I believe it was the same week as my sister-in-law, Aviva, give her a shout out, got married. So like the first, major simcha after her brother was killed, Eli Moshe, Hashem Yikom Damo, which is maybe the same night or within a couple nights of each other. So I'm wondering if you could, tell us a little bit more about the challenge. I've certainly heard from others that can be very, very have some real serious stress around how to celebrate in the lead up to the simcha itself under such circumstances. So I'm wondering if you could share a little more about that.
Yeah, so this I guess it was married about 13 months ago now. So obviously we wanted to bring in Binyamin as much as we could into the wedding. We had like a little stand with like a picture of him, and people wrote. We actually during the shiva we had like a book if people could write a mitzvah or good deed that they could do. B'zchut Binyamin, we literally had like hundreds and thousands of people writing in mitzvahs. And we had I think we did the same thing at the wedding as well. Standing up the chuppah was obviously very bittersweet. It was beautiful, obviously, and very exciting to see my son marry a wonderful girl, an amazing family. But at the same time, his presence was really felt missing under the chuppah. But especially the last show of brachos was done by Binyamin's unit. They all came up. There was a lot of singing and a lot of dancing. It was a tremendous ruach. In fact, somebody called me out of the blue. They were watching the video of it, and they felt like after watching that, they asked me I'd love to be able to make Aliyah, have a kid who's gonna have a wedding like that. So it was exceptionally emotional, more so than any other wedding. And we also just recently, like I said, my grandson was born and had a bris, and his name's Amichai, but he's also Amichai Binyamin Meir, who was named after him. So also at the same time, the sort of is he assumption there'll be his name will be in there somewhere, but you're thinking about it beforehand, and then obviously it's emotional having a child named after your son. It's we've had actually a number of kids, maybe 9 or 10 kids have been named after our son at this point. But obviously, when it's your own family, your own daughter doing it, it means so much more. Yeah, I mean it's beautiful to be able to celebrate some of this. But at the same time, your heart is broken a little bit that he's not going to be able to share in that and have his own simcha, his own wife, his own kids, his own family, grandchildren. It's always hard to think about.
Yeah, and the unit that came up, it was a special thing to see, and the bracha itself was by the Mefaked Avram Rosner, who we actually interviewed also on this podcast about Binyamin and some other people who he lost. So we can also link to that in the show notes, and people who want to listen to that also can definitely remember hear Avram's perspective on that whole ordeal as a Mefaked losing a soldier, which is a fascinating dynamic as well. So, in closing, you alluded to Beit Binyamin. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of it, but those who haven't, or even those who have, can you clarify sort of where the idea came from, what it's all about, and sort of where it's headed at this point?
Sure. So, about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, actually, before the war even started. So we bought a house. We thought it was an investment for Airbnb. It was a beautiful, nice size, 4 separate entrances. There's 8 bedrooms. There's living room and 3 living rooms. It's really a nice size. I thought, wow, we could really buy this. We were not even looking for this. We feel that Hashem just put it into our heads at the time because he knew what it was going to come up with. We were working on it for a couple of years. Once Binyamin passed away, we after a few months, we decided we're going to turn this change tracks and turn this into a retreat center for soldiers, for bereaved families, for Nova survivors, wives of soldiers. And so we've had literally for the last 2 years constantly busy during the week. Shabbases, we ever have families, especially towards the beginning of the war, we had families who been away from their spouse and kids for hundreds of days. And it's an opportunity for them to reconnect. I mean, it's a really beautiful house. It's like really did it like 5-star accommodations, and we pamper them. We give them spa. We give them tours of Tzfat and glass blowing, and all the food is catered for. And we also have a lot of retreats as well. We have like structured retreats. We can host like 20 people sleeping, and so we'll have to rent out the spaces if the crowd is bigger. And we've had about 4 or 5 Nova survivor retreats recently. We have 2 parents of Nova survivors, those who were killed in Nova. We started a wives of Nova who were struggling, seeing their husbands being away and being able to manage a house with young kids. So we've been doing like a 2-month online Zoom course with therapists, and then retreats. We have also regular grief retreats, soldier retreats, lone soldiers. So it's constantly busy. It requires obviously a lot of fundraising. So I'm more involved in the back end of the fundraising side. We're actually doing a live Yom HaZikaron. We're starting doing actually a cause match as well as a major fundraiser for the year. And the retreats involved will have therapy, and yoga and breath work and journal therapy and art therapy and again also the pampering that comes along with the food, the barbecues and the spa and the tours of Tzfat and it's amazing. We have obviously it's a very spiritual place. We have a lot of non-religious people who come, and they're really affected by just being in Tzfat and being in our place, and seeing also that there's bereaved families who are doing this. We had a couple of families who they lost their nephew, I think, and there were 2 nephews. Both families came together. They said months later they still like saying showed up, and they didn't want to even come, but they say, we're just going to go. And then when they saw that it was a family in their situation who like built this place and put this all together, they said after the Shabbos, that's it, right? Shiva's over. That's it. We're gonna confront life. We're gonna change, and we're gonna make the most. So that obviously means a lot to us. It's not it's a 2 or 3 day, 4-day retreat. It's not long term, but if you can be a place of healing where you can start the healing process, that's really what we're about. We had one lady who was a wife of a soldier who was really depressed and didn't want to come, and her friends convinced her to come to a retreat. And at the end of the retreat, she said, now I'm ready for therapy. That was what she said. So that's a big win for us when someone can say that. We had a group of secular soldiers' wives that came, and one of them still in touch with my wife. And she said she learns every week afterwards, a Chavruta every once a week afterwards. So this really has a very profound effect on people's emotional and physical and spiritual health. And unfortunately, we're all hurting, not just those who are lost, but the whole country needs it. We need like another 20 of these houses at least. But yeah, and that's pretty much Binyamin in a nutshell.
Wow. So thank you for sharing all of these incredible stories, and the resilience and the faith that you guys have, expressed publicly for Klal Yisrael has been such a source of chizuk. So thank you for all of that and for all the work in Beit Binyamin. Happy we're going to include the link to the cause match and below. People who want to, take part in this special project are certainly, welcome and encouraged to do so. Usually end off with a quick rapid fire round. So we'll have 3 short questions and 3 hopefully short answers. We're here in the summer. We have these nice long Shabbos afternoons finally. So what do you like to do at that time?
So I try and learn a little bit with the kids. I go to Chavruta, and I must admit, I like to sleep. I like to read, a big reader, so I enjoy reading. So that's pretty much how I spend time, family, friends, enjoying the company.
Okay, and what's your favorite sefer on Parshat Shavua?
So in terms of, I mean, at the moment I'm just going through like Chumash with Rashi. So even it's back to basics, but it takes a lot of time, especially parshas like now, where it's like very definitely complicated. So it doesn't leave me as much time to read it safe. I'm reading a little bit on the Rosh Yeshiva when we farm on Parsha Shavua, so I'll look at that before Shabbos. A couple of different Torah at the ready. Also, Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Sachs as well. Obviously, he's a go-to person to read. But the Chumash Rashi is taking a while.
Chumash Rashi is maybe one of the most underrated things that a person could learn. So much there. And I'm happy to hear that people are focused on it. I usually end off asking guests if they could choose any other job in the world, something they dreamed of as a kid, what would that be? But I'm actually going to switch up this time and ask you, Binyamin, if you had a dream job to do professionally, what do you think that might be?
So, he was talking at point of like probably working with like at-risk kids and people who are struggling, and maybe therapy or something like that. I think that's where he would have headed. He talked about also like just having a farm of his own in the south of Israel. So have a mixture of the two, probably putting like kids who are at risk in that kind of farm environment where they, which is like an amazing place for them to heal and to grow. So probably something like that. Yeah, now he's learning in the Yeshiva Shalmala instead.
Okay, Rob Early, thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you. Wishing you and the family continued chizuk and nachama, and we should only hear good news.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you, and yeah, please, if anyone's interested in donating to our cause, you'll share the link. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you. Bye bye.
So let's go back to your Aliyah story. You alluded to this before as you started to prepare back in Canada for your Aliyah. It was really about selling your house, selling your business, wrapping everything up. So tell me about that decision. Was that something that you considered maybe leaving some of your doors open to come back to Montreal if things wouldn't work out? How did you decide to go all in and really burn all the bridges?
Well, there's a story, and I don't know if it's true or not, but there was a war and there was a general who came to attack the country on a fleet of ships. And when he saw that his army was losing the battle on the coast, he set fire to his ships. And when the soldiers on the ground saw behind them that their fleet was burned and sunk and that there was no heading home, they fought onwards and upwards, and they were ultimately victorious. And I feel that, when people tell me, why do you sell your house? Why don't you just rent it out to someone else? Why don't you keep your business and run it from a distance? When I made the decision to move to Israel, I wanted to make sure that there was no coming back. I wanted to make sure that I gave it my all. So we sold our house and I sold my business, and I said, that's it. I'm not coming back. I know why I'm moving to Israel. It's the place that I belong. And once I get there and go through everything to get there, I'm not going to come back. So for me, there was no question. I didn't want to leave the door open, because when you get to Israel, you have to totally flip your way of looking at life. You have to flip your understanding of what material wealth is. It's a totally different culture. You have to change everything about yourself. And if you are even considering turning around and coming back and saying, hey, listen, if it doesn't work out, we can always come back, I don't think you'll be able to give it your all. It's just something that doesn't work. So
were you worried about Parnassa?
I made sure that there was no coming back.
Were you worried about your Parnassa?
Yes, but you develop an extremely new sense of bitachon and amuna about Parnassa. I think that you need to make a plan. I don't think you can just show up here with empty pockets and expect things to work out. It probably won't work out. You need to make a plan. Now, whenever you invest in a new business or you start a new job, you don't know if it's going to work out. So I guess you can call that worried. So I formulated a business. I came up with a business plan. I spoke to a bunch of people. I got some investors, and I came with a plan. Now, the plan that I made didn't exactly work out exactly how I intended to work out. But I would tell people that you need to make a plan. You can't just come empty-handed. Now, if you're a professional, and obviously if you can work remotely, you don't have to change anything about your life. Nothing's going to change for you. If you're a professional, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer, and you want to get certified to, come to Israel and work here in Israel as an Israeli, obviously you're going to have Hebrew. For me, I'm not a 9-to-5 kind of guy. I can't punch a clock. I need to I need to be my own boss. I need to run a business. The part that didn't work out is basically, and I went in the same direction, but I've had to pivot, especially 2 months after I got my business open, the war started. And my entire business originally was totally dependent on tourism. And tourism fell through a crack. So obviously, you got to survive. You gotta keep on moving. But I think if you have the attitude that you understand that life is not smooth and there are bumps in life, and if you have that attitude, I believe that you can make it work anywhere. But it's definitely worth to come armed with a plan. You have direction.
Right. So I do want to hear more about that plan and the cracks in the plan and the pivots, which we're going to get into in a moment. But you did say something very interesting. You spoke about how Aliyah is a complete mindset shift, whether it's your bitachon and your headspace. So I like that a lot, and I want to maybe challenge it a little bit, because one of these stigmas about Beit Shemesh is that people come there so they can live in Israel but not be Israeli. They want to sort of retain so much of their American life while being physically on the land of Eretz Yisrael. Whereas you're coming and saying you did move to Beit Shemesh, but you also had this seismic shift in your outlook. So you talk a little more how you've experienced that, or how you've seen other people come to Beit Shemesh. And on the one hand, it's understandable to try to transition with the comforts of American life, but also understanding, no, there's something really deep here. And if you're not ready to make that mindset shift, you're not doing Aliyah properly.
Well, listen, people joke and say that there were no missile landings in Beit Shemesh because Trump told Hamas that they can't attack any American targets. So if you really, really love America, so stay in America. If you love America but understand that you don't belong there, you belong in Israel, so make Aliyah. Coming to Beit Shemesh, your transition will be easier because there are a lot of Americans. If more people would make Aliyah, the transition would be even better, easier. There would be more financial opportunities. The schools would change, and we can get into that later. Everything would be different if a wholesome amount of people would come and move here. It would change the flavor. But you have to understand that even though you come to Beit Shemesh and there's a lot of Americans here, it's still Israel. You're still going to have to deal with Hebrew. You're going to have to deal with schools. You're going to have to deal with the government. You want to get a driver's license or a passport, or you just want to go on a vacation somewhere. Most people you're going to deal with really can't communicate in English. You have to understand that the driving is different. The attitude of, whether it's rude or not to block a street. American ideas and manners just don't apply here. I don't think Israelis are rude. I just think that they're totally different. And America is a totally different animal. So you have to understand, if you've only come to Israel on vacation and you stayed at the Waldorf, you don't understand what Israel is at all, because you had someone pick you up, you had someone drive you, you didn't have to deal with traffic or delays or complications or getting a flat tire. You just never had to deal with that. But once again, that's regular daily life. I mean, even if you live in New York, you're going to have a flat tire. You're going to have to deal at one point with getting pulled over by the police or going to a government office or a doctor's office. It's just, you have to understand it's different, and you can't expect everything to stay the same. You have to understand that. I mean, my wife, since my kids were babies, she would always tell them that Eretz Yisrael is where we belong and that's our place for us, and we just don't live there yet. So they understood when we came here. And I think that I think the only taina that I have, I don't blame someone for growing up in America. I did also. But I think the attitude where people are not taught that ultimately Eretz Yisrael is our final destination is where we get into problems. Because if people understood that, and people understood that we have to get to Eretz Yisrael, you don't have to get into all the Geula talk and all the doomsday talk, and you don't have to get into any of that. Even if everything stays status quo, everyone has to know that Eretz Yisrael is a place where a Jew belongs, where he has the best learning, doing the best mitzvahs. And it's a gift that Hashem gave us. We say it every single day in Shema. We say it in, it's everywhere. And just like people just, kind of skip over that. They don't learn Tanakh. Yeshiva system doesn't teach Tanakh. I mean, some parts of the school system do teach, but the Haredi system does not teach it at all. And at minimum, they don't tell anyone that Eretz Yisrael is where we belong. So the attitude, and everyone's saying, wow, why don't more people make Aliyah? It's because no one ever told them. It's like news. It's a total news flash that anyone should make Aliyah, and that has to change. But obviously, you also have to understand that just helps you understand in your mind that there's a next step that has to be taken. Once you get here, you have to realize it's a different country. This country's only been around for 75 years, and they haven't figured out everything that America's figured out. Like I always say, like they, you can't even like mail a letter without making an appointment at the post office. I mean, they built this country. You look at the skyline of Tel Aviv, and you see they've built skyscrapers out of the desert. But why can't they just figure out how how to mail a letter without a problem? Like, I don't know. They just haven't figured it out. It's like an American mind who's fully American doesn't understand Israel and will get very quickly frustrated and become angry. And every time you get in your car and try to drive down the street, you're just going to be miserable all the time. And you have to come here with an attitude that Israel is a different country. It's a place you're supposed to be. Nothing is perfect, and get with the program. It's called adopting. When you change careers, you have to get used to a new culture in your office. So it's no different than that. You can't say, well, how come you're not like my old job? How come you're like my old office didn't do it like that? I don't know. They don't do it like that. These changes have to be made. You're literally going to the other side of the world, into the Middle East. And, things are different over here.
So I really like that answer. And towards the end, you were talking about how like we're younger, we're still developing, which is certainly true. But in the beginning, when you started to describe the differences, you surprised me a little bit because you didn't say, it's worse and Eretz Yisrael and Kisbi Surim and you have to deal with it. You said it's different and the manners are different and the life cycle, the lifestyle is different and the culture is different. You didn't say better or worse. You just said different. And then you continued to say it's just a mindset. It's a mindset. Is that a mindset you had to train yourself with, or was it a mindset you always had to be able to be so flexible and adaptive? Because it's very inspiring. It's very refreshing to hear. But I'm wondering if you can go a little more to where that comes from.
No, the mindset that I have today is not the same mindset I had when I got here. The mindset that I'm promoting right now is a mindset that will help someone survive. Because when I got here, my emunah and bitachon were nowhere near that. Now, what everyone throws this line around, as soon as you get here and you start having difficulty, they say, oh, Eretz Yisrael's nikna b'yisurim. First of all, I really think that Eretz Yisrael's nikna b'kesef. If you have money over here, that solves almost every issue. You do observe that people get here and they start having issues. And I believe very intently that Hashem, when you get to Hashem's holy land, we know it's a land that spits out the people that don't belong here and absorbs the people that do belong here. And I believe that there is a spiritual purification process that has to happen when a person gets to Eretz Yisrael. And whether you like it or not, you're put through the washing machine and you need to develop as a survival technique, emunah and bitachon, which we should have had all along. We should have had it from day one, even before we got here. But the attitude of that everything, that Hashem's in control of everything, and you definitely feel it more over here. You need to have that. You can't continue with an American mindset and come to Eretz Yisrael, because Eretz Yisrael will teach you who's boss, Hashem's boss. So, once again, everything that happens in a person's life is obviously meant to be, but your entire mental health is fully based on how you observe things around you. Meaning a simple thing can ruin your day, or a simple thing could make your day. You find a parking spot or you don't find a parking spot. It's a difference between, it's all about attitude. And attitude is created through emunah and bitachon, the way you observe the world around you. So, you ultimately have to get to that point of understanding that it's only Hashem that rules the world. And it's not your bank account and it's not your people that you know. It's just you and Hashem, and you have that relationship. And every time you daven, you understand that you're developing that relationship further. And as far as I'm concerned, no matter where you are in life, you're not going to be happy unless your attitude aligns with those ideas of trusting in Hashem and believing in Hashem. And that's the beginning and the end of everything. So if you can work on that before you get here, matovu manaim. But, if you just show up here and you expect things to work out because you're American, or because, you're paying for something, or just because, hey, I have an American passport, no one really cares. It's just you become one of, another 7 or 8 million people who live here, and you need to make it work. And it boils down to your relationship between you and Hashem, whether when things work out or don't work out for you, whether you get upset about it or you say, hey, that's what Hashem wanted. I'm fine with it,
Most people realize that, the word aliyah, it doesn't just mean moving. Right? They're going up. They're coming for some bigger purpose, and they know that's going to come with changes. And people know themselves, like, how much change can they handle? It's definitely something different, and that's why people are willing to come, even though it will probably cost a lot of sacrifice. But it's worth it. This is home.
Okay, and you live in Ramat Beit Shemesh, which is a wonderful place, but also every day a bigger and bigger and bigger place with a lot of subsections and communities. So I don't think we've had a guest yet from your community in what's called Mem Shalosh, although we did do a wonderful event, and thank you for your help in arranging the wonderful Shir Tursky, which many people have benefited both in person and the recordings, and we can link to that as well. So that was very, very special to connect with the Shtark Tank and Mem Shalosh. But maybe for listeners who are considering different communities in different areas, tell us a little bit about what that's like and why you chose it.
That's a good question also. Yeah, there are a lot of different neighborhoods in Ramat Beit Shemesh. it's a lot of them have certain things in common. As you know, a lot of Americans throughout Beit Shemesh and in Mem Shalosh as well. It is a pretty diversified neighborhood, I would say. There is a Talmud Torah, like a cheder in the middle of the neighborhood, a regular Haredi cheder that has, there's many families here that send their children to there. There's also, as you had hosted the event at Rabbi Gottlieb Shul, which is kind of like a more regular Dati Leumi Torani, but Dati Leumi shul neighborhood. They have another shul that's moved down recently. It's called Shari Tefillah. It used to be up the hill. It's really quite a big mix here. There are other neighborhoods that I'd say maybe a little younger, maybe people with mostly younger kids. Here we have a lot of young kids, thank God, a lot of teenagers also, and slightly older families. It's Beit Shemesh. It's hot. It's right near parks and stuff. I don't know what else is super helpful about it, but it's to share. But it's a nice neighborhood. It's way too expensive, which is the connection between where I live and what I do. Just trying to help people being able to move here and buy houses, especially the way houses and mortgages are done in Israel. On the one hand, it's maybe good for me that we own a home here, and I'm sure it's worth a lot of money now. But it doesn't help me if I'm not going anywhere. But it is expensive, which is part of what I work with people to try to be able to afford it. It would be nice if there were ways to keep prices kind of more stable, but I don't know, it hasn't worked yet. But it's a nice neighborhood.
That's a great segue to our next topic, but I just wanted to sort of zone in on one thing, which is what specifically drove you there? Was it the fact that Rabbi Gali was starting the shul, or was the building project that attracted you? What exactly brought you there?
Honestly, we were looking at that point for a house. We gave up on the market coming down, and we finally just decided that even though for as much as it's cost, we could have bought a whole block in Memphis. We found something, and we knew people who moved to Rabbi Gottlieb's community. We're not like directly on that in that development, but we're very close by, and they're actually building a new shul even closer to our house than to their original neighborhood. That was definitely part of it. There are people I knew from where we used to live in Ramat Shiloh, and who I knew from either from KBY or from YU, and Rabbi Gottlieb, of course, himself is great. It was definitely part of it, but it was a nice diversified community with the house that fit our needs. I would say we could have ended up somewhere else in Ramat Beit Shemesh also, but we're glad we're here, and it's very nice.
Got it. Okay, so the next part of this conversation, we're going to shift gears a little bit and sort of pick your brain as a professional, specifically a financial professional, someone who spent a lot of time speaking to families, planning, executing, and living in Israel, making Aliyah from America, from other places. So there's a few topics within that we're going to talk about. And I guess I want to start with the following. I think, you and I both, you made Aliyah on your own. I was zocha to come with my parents. Many people have made Aliyah. Many people have been successful here. Many Israelis who were born here, they live, they're not destitute, they're not on the streets, they're very happy. So, what are the real, I would say, like, why not? Like, are there any real financial reasons, right? We're not talking to you as an educator, which you also are, and a parent, which you also are, but from a financial perspective, are there any real reasons why a person should be saying, Aliyah is not for me, from your angle?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'd like everyone to see if it's possible, but it's a little bit like moving anywhere else. If you can't afford it, you can't afford it. And there are people here that can't afford it. I deal with people and I see people's, lifestyles and spending habits. And there's really a ginormous range of what people spend. A lot of Americans that come here, they really make sacrifices and change their lifestyle, or some of them make enough money they could keep their lifestyle, but it can be very expensive. But there are people, especially I've met with people coming from out of town. Let's say, even if they own a home, their home there is just not worth anywhere near what it would cost to buy a home in places like around Beit Shemesh. Now, depending on what their family situation is, it could be, you may know this better than I do, but there are places outside of kind of the major popular Anglo destinations. If you're not looking at, Tel Aviv, Yerushalayim, Modi'in, Ra'anana, Beit Shemesh, that'll be cheaper. But I don't know that that's for everyone. A lot of people like coming to these places like Beit Shemesh and some other Anglo-heavy cities, because it's a softer landing, an easier transition. The schools are, maybe a little more similar to what they're used to, and at least speak their language. And these places are expensive, and even people with really good jobs sometimes have a hard time, being able to afford a house or cars are very expensive here. So it really does depend on what you come with and what your earning power is here. Like you said, there are plenty, the national average salaries here is very low, 12, 13,000 shekel, talking about less than $50,000 a year, which, in America, if you read various studies or listen to, podcasts talking about what it costs to be Jewish in America with tuitions and things, it's, much, much, much higher than that. So there are certain things that are less expensive here, like tuition and maybe healthcare. And there are certain things that are much, much more expensive. And it really depends, if a person is flexible and has the ability to pivot to a career that makes more money here and to pivot their lifestyle to really, really scale back. There are people that come and don't have a car. People come and move into much, much, much smaller homes. People who are willing to accept that they may not own a home for a long time. There's certain government programs that will try to help people, have easier entry into their first home. But some people might come and say they're just going to rent, and the rent is cheaper than buying. It's something I meet with people a lot about is, can I afford to make Aliyah? We try to really understand what their lifestyle is, how that could be adapted in Israel, what their expected incomes or assets would allow them to live like here. There are cases where we'll say wow, this would take a ton of sacrifice, a ton. Or, so again, there's places like that all over the world. In America, not everyone could afford to live everywhere either. So I'd like to be able to try to help everyone do it or figure out how to do it, but I can't say it's always possible. And I could say it usually will require, some sacrifice or some changes to one's lifestyle, even if it's just one car instead of two, or an attached house instead of a standalone house. These things are different for some people, and it's impressive that people are willing to come different stages in life and make these sacrifices, but I can't say everyone could do it. That would be, I think, a little bit of a jump.
Right. It's very interesting. I mean, you said that it really all surrounds, a 4-word question: can I afford it? And I think the word within that sentence that strikes me the most is, it. What is the it that we're trying to afford? And you made reference to this in the beginning. Is the question of Aliyah a question of being able to move across the country to a totally different type of society, financial system, economy, and to live the same life that I was living in a totally different country? As you said, this is a question that anyone who moves from any city to another city. So within America, there's some things that are common, but some things that are very different in the prices and in the markets and in the commute and in the transportation systems and all these different things. So, when I have these conversations with people, and I'm not qualified to have them, but people who reach out to me from the podcast and want to talk about Aliyah. So really the question comes down to, do you want to move to a different country but continue the exact same lifestyle? I don't think that's a very fair or realistic question to ask. So, is that what you see also in your conversations?
And you're right. I don't. I think you're right. Most people realize that the word Aliyah, it doesn't just mean moving. They're going up. They're coming for some bigger purpose, and they know that's going to come with changes. And people know themselves, how much change can they handle, or how much do they think they can handle? They try to figure out. I would say most people realize that they're not really it's not just the same as moving from Memphis to Cincinnati or from Teaneck to Fairlawn. It's definitely, it's something different, and that's why people are willing to come, even though it will probably cost a lot of sacrifice, but it's worth it. It is something more than that. This is home. This is where we think, we believe the future of the Jewish people is going to be, and those who want to be here on the playing field instead of in the stands. So they come, even if it means, not having the exact same condition. So you're right. It's not just like any other move. I didn't mean to compare it complete to that, but at the same time, we also have to work out the numbers, because at the end of the day, you need a roof over your head, you got to buy food, you got to have a way to get around, a job and things like that, and depending on one's skill sets and resources, it could take different levels of sacrifice.
So I would like you to tell us a little bit, first of all, about, you were involved in Aliyah, like your family's here, it was always an option, it was never an option, you know what I mean? Kind of catch us up a little bit, and then where you're at right now, because none of you, I guarantee, have heard of the community that he is living in right now, and it's definitely going to be an interesting thing to hear about.
So I was born in New York City. I lived most of my childhood in Boston, Massachusetts. I made Aliyah in 2007, Kaf Gimel Av, 2007. I was at the time 12 years and 9 months to the day, 3 months before my bar mitzvah, exactly. How do I know that?
Oh, because you're about to come to a place and have a bar mitzvah with nobody you know? That
Also,
seems like a good indicator.
There's a better story though.
Okay, here we go.
So I am from a Yekish family, and the Yekish minhag is to do Hanachas Tefillin 3 months before the Bar Mitzvah.
Oh, you came on your Bo Bayom?
On my Bo Bayom Hanachas Tefillin day.
Right, yeah.
So I really wanted to do it on the plane, in the galley, Hanachas Tefillin. My father's like, no, we're going to go to the Kotel. It's going to be our first day in Israel. It's going to be so special.
It was raining.
It was August.
Okay.
But so we got to Ben Gurion, and then we went to our house in Beit Shemesh. We dropped a bunch of suitcases there, but we were still waiting for our lift.
Of course.
So we went to an apartment in Yerushalayim for a few weeks with like some suitcases, but some suitcases in Beit Shemesh. The suitcase in Beit Shemesh had my pants.
Your pants.
My pants. So I woke up in the morning, my Menachas Tefillin, and I only had shorts for the day of Menachas Tefillin at the Kotel. Big problem.
Right. So you start wearing a shook skirt? Or one of those baggy pajama pants for
The Dropkick Murphys Scottish kilts. So we worked it out. We found a pair of pants, whatever. It all worked out in the end, but it was certainly an eventful first 24 hours in Israel, to say the least.
Exciting.
So I actually did 7th grade in America. I did 7th grade in Israel. I stayed back a year to give myself an extra year. I started middle school after Aliyah. My transition was overall very smooth with a lot of siyata d'shmaya, a lot of gratitude to my parents and my teachers.
Your whole family's here.
Whole family's here.
You guys all made Aliyah as a unit.
My parents live in Beit Shemesh. I have 4 siblings, all married. One lives in Givat Shmuel, and everyone else lives somewhere far and random. Sparamon, that's pretty far. A Moreshet, have you heard of Moreshet?
Have heard of Moreshet.
Outside of Haifa. And Bnei Netzarim, which we can get into a little bit.
Right.
And then the boring one in Givat Shmuel.
Yeah, seriously. That guy. Or girl.
So we're all over. We're all very well acclimated, Baruch Hashem, with a lot of, again, people who do what you have done and others who come on their own, post yeshiva. It's something I truly look up to and salute. Not saying that I had any sayon of. I was brought with a very loving family and a home to Israel, which puts me in a different zone with its own challenges, its own opportunities, which we'll get into also. So I did middle school in Beit Shemesh. I did high school in Yerushalayim.
What sibling are you?
Bechor.
You're the oldest.
Yeah, the deadline was my bar mitzvah. My parents said, if we don't make Aliyah by Yaakov's bar mitzvah, we're done.
Was it a hard transition for you getting here?
To
There's
my
a
bar
lot
mitzvah.
of people who think by the time their kid is 12, it's already off the table.
So I'm not here to tell anyone what to do. I think that if you have the mindset that it's possible and your kids are in like a good emotional state and academic state with preparation, with siyata d'shmaya, it can work. I've seen it work. Like before we made Aliyah, so first of all, my Monty school in Boston, Massachusetts, shout out to them, very good Hebrew program overall.
Really?
In addition to that, my parents hired the local Sharut Leumi, like Bnei Akiva girls, once a week to like tutor, like informal tutor. We used to play popular.
So you knew you were coming.
Yeah, like the popular Israeli computer games, we would play with them in Hebrew, like after school once a week.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
That's so cute. Your parents just came one time and said this, or was there like a family discussion, or like?
It was on their mind always.
Did you take a lot of trips beforehand?
We took one big family trip when I was 10. It was actually during the week of the Gush Katif Gerush.
Machatz.
My yeshuv now is actually the people who were kicked out of Gush Katif are the founders of my yeshuv. So it's a bit of a full circle.
Wow.
So that was summer.
Did you
5.
know that was a pilot trip?
No. And it was like, it wasn't really a pilot trip. It was
Right.
like a soft pilot trip. Then Thanksgiving 2006, my parents came on the official pilot trip. They came back and basically said, like, this is it, we're doing it. March 2007, my dad came for some work interviews. I came with him to look at some schools. And August 2007, here we are.
Crazy. In Beit Shemesh. Ramat Beit Shemesh?
Beit Shemesh,
Beit Shemesh.
close to Israel.
And was that was probably a good, smooth transition?
It was a very smooth transition. I'm very grateful to my friends who, we had a baseball team. We had, a sports chevra. I was a big Boston sports fan. So when I made Aliyah, the Red Sox won the World Series 2 months later. The Patriots had their 18-1 season, and the Celtics won the championship in the summer.
So only Tom Brady let you down that year.
Yeah, it was a big bummer.
It's not a common statement, that's for sure. One giant loss.
Ouch.
Yeah.
That was low.
Oh, wow. Okay, fine. So you made it that is a big Boston year. And then just high school here, whatever, and then the Hebrew. I'm sure Hebrew wasn't really on par, but there was good programs and everything. It wasn't a big issue.
Yeah, so overall it was very good. There were certainly challenges. I would say that there's like a big question for us, guys who made Aliyah as kids about integration. The parents obviously have a harder time with their Hebrew and their cultural stuff. And for me also, like I was in 12th grade looking for a yeshiva. And one of the big draws to Karen Biavno was like they had these Americans. And I was certainly much more comfortable socially, even after 5 or 6 years, with the Americans and with the Israelis. So I was sort of in the middle. The real solution to that issue came actually through my wife. She really like pushed me. It was like, we've been here enough years. We're not gonna have our kids growing up with like American accents. Like we really have to like take this next step to integration. So I won't say that I was like so smart about it or such a tzaddik about it, but it's a challenge. There are people who grew up in Beit Shemesh, born in Israel, who have like low-level American accent.
The first girl I ever dated, hopefully doesn't do this, from Beit Shemesh, Shema Beit Shemesh, whatever. And I remember like going out and like she was speaking Hebrew. She understood everything, whatever. That's usually the case. But her Hebrew wasn't like really halak, you know. Wasn't so. I was like, what are you doing? That's how I'm supposed to sound. You know what I mean? I just got here though.
Right. So credit to my wife, who was like, we're not going to be that zone. We're gonna take it one step further. Also, you know, we got married. We're in the Karen B'Av Nikolel. So most of like the living families on campus are Israeli families.
So tell me then a little bit about your how long were you dating? I'm leading the question somewhere because I want to get to something. But how long were you dating?
I mean,
your wife, like dating in general.
Dating was like a year. Found my wife after around 9 months, give or take. I don't remember the exact.
And you were dating Israelis or always Anglo?
I dated one Israeli.
And was it
a funny story?
No shaykh, like no shaykhs?
I don't know. She didn't give it enough time. It was a one and done, so I don't really know. But she was Sephardi, also the only Sephardi girl I dated. And we went on a Chol HaMoed Sukkos. So we went to Cafe Angels behind Tachana Markazi, and we sat in the sukkah with coffee and a rugelach. And she takes out the rugelach and makes some mizonos, and she brings it up close to her mouth. And I was like gonna say like Alicia. It was like here, and I was like, just keep your mouth shut. And then afterwards, I realized that Sephardi women don't make brachos on mitzvos shezman grama. So it's a good thing I kept my mouth shut. But whatever, that was my only Israeli date. Yeah.
That's so funny. And you felt though like you were gonna get somebody Anglo.
It was gonna be somewhere like me, somewhere in between.
She also from?
So my wife is, when I made Aliyah, she was my across the street neighbor. We lived one side of Rehovot Shoshan in Beit Shemesh. She lived on the other side. I actually, my first initiation with their family is that when we got to the house, the first lady like down the stairs with a smile and a welcome was my future mother-in-law.
Really?
One summer later, she was looking for a babysitter for her son. She had 5 girls, at the time it was less, and 2 boys. One had special needs, Avram Zimbalist, my heroic and famous brother-in-law. And so she wanted...
Wait, Zimbalist like Fairlawn?
Cousins.
Oh, that's so funny.
So he was 1 year old. Yeah, shout out to Michael and Renee, and AJ and Jared and Nikki.
Yeah.
But then so she wanted to like be more available to take care of Avram, who had Down syndrome, was 1 year old at the time, I think 1 or 2. And she wanted like someone like a babysitter to play with her older son. Her older son is Eli Moshe Zimbalist. So he was like the shadchan who brought me into the family.
What's his name?
Eli Moshe.
That's so funny. It's my brother's name.
Yeah.
Eli Moshe.
So Eli Moshe was killed in Gaza.
Oh, wow.
And he's the one who really brought me into a very, very, very special family. So
seriously?
Yeah.
Wow, that's your brother-in-law. Probably when did that happen? Like within the last year or two?
June 2000, right after Shavuos.
But yeah, that's a whole... what I was trying to understand is that you came 7th grade, 12 years old. Did you feel integrated, even though your Hebrew was probably good enough to get by? Did you feel integrated enough that you could have dated straight Israeli and just jumped right into that world? Or there's this like buffer zone of your parents are Anglo, either you're the generation that made it or you're not, but you know what I mean? There's still a lot of like American...
I think it's more cultural. It's not about language. It's about your mindset. Could I have made it work with an Israeli if Kadosh Baruch Hu set it up? I probably could have. I would have been open to the idea, but I certainly felt more comfortable in my background, my life up until that point.
Okay. And you want your kids though to have the full spectrum.
So their Hebrew is very good. Their culture is very Israeli. We're trying to get them some Anglo midos.
That is it's so funny because when I first like got to Israel, there's a component. If you're not like diving right into Beit Shemesh, so the component of you is like, I dafka don't want an American bubble. I want a little more Sabra, a little more Israeli, whatever. But there's dafka things that are like about the, you know what I mean, that the Anglo bring to the table that is not present here, that I think are very valuable and important. And, you know, that's what they're offering to Israel as a broad group. Better show up in customer service sooner or later. All of you who are watching, thinking about coming, come here and just get on the phone and start talking to people because that needs improvement for sure.
It's a great story, by the way. I don't know, like a good dear family friend. It was actually a guy named Aryeh Deveret from Beit Shemesh. I don't know if you know Aryeh. So Aryeh made Aliyah from Canada.
Aryeh
Deveret.
Sure.
So he made Aliyah with the exact same mindset. He's like, Israel's such a great country. I believe he's from Canada.
Yeah. Okay.
He's like, I'm going to make Israel better. And I'm going to open up his first project, his first like entrepreneur business was he opened up a Auto King in Beit Shemesh. And he's like, I'm going to open up a car shop where people can feel like, you know, normal customer service. Now, Eli Moshe and Aryeh were very, very close. They were like best buddies. They were 40-year age gap and they were close buds. but also just about like the, the ability to add value. So like I live now in this yeshuva, a very like Israeli, and like they asked me to give shiur. If the Rav's not around for Shabbos, I'll sub in or whatever. So like all I have to do is like open up like Rav Soloveitchik, like something like, whoa, that's brilliant. Because like guys in America, like they've heard this stuff before, but like for the Israelis, they're like, wow, that's tremendous. So for me, it's easy. For them, it's enjoyable. So there's no shortage of opportunities for people who want to take some of the best of their Anglo upbringing and bring it into the Israeli world in whatever way. The opportunities are out there.
Yeah, I definitely feel like most of the time people who are in America thinking about Israel, I mean, it makes sense, but it's definitely something that I think, could use an adjustment, which is that generally their mindset is, what can Israel offer me? They're not necessarily thinking about what they're going to bring to the table and how they could add to and, help build what's going on here. But you spend a year or two, you realize how small it is and how many gaps there are that you could be the one to play a significant role in. I feel like often in America, people are not really thinking about making a difference. Like, oh, what's a good community? I don't know, here. Like, okay. It's everything's just like more or less operating already.
And someone might hear that and might think, well, I'm not a big entrepreneur. I'm not like one of these guys. But here's the big mistake that people make all the time. And it's true somewhat in America, but it's very true in Israel, that the country is so dynamic. So like you might conceptualize your choice of a community like a vending machine. Like there's C4 and I'll click that and I'll get that soda, but it's so much more fluid. And so whether you like it or not, things are changing. And when you're here, you're by default a part of that conversation, a part of that story. You're going to show up. You're going to, have your voice heard at a town hall meeting, at a shul board, whatever it's going to be. So like, it's not even like a question of whether you want to like make a difference. Like you're going to be part of a very rapidly developing country, society, community. And it's just a matter of like getting that in your head as soon as possible.